Hello, welcome back to Jesus Speaks Farsi and our new series called Hidden Gems. I'm Chrissy and I'm here with Joe. Great to be with you, Joe. What's this series all about?
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. This series, actually, I'm excited about. One of the things that's happened in 2026 is we've got a whole bunch of new listeners to the Jesus Speaks Farsi podcast, which is great. Probably because of Iran being in the news so much this year, people taking an interest in what's happening with the church on the ground. And so on the podcast team, we've got a great team, people working in the background. We've asked which were our favorite episodes from years gone by that we would love for our new listeners to hear who maybe missed them as they were first aired. So we're going to be asking each of some of the team members to share their favorite episode. And Chrissy, we've asked you to share one of your favorite episodes, this first one. So which one is it?
Great, thanks, Joe. So the hidden gem that I've dug up from our back catalogue is called Iran's Church, a centuries-old story. And this is actually the first episode I ever recorded. So it's got a special place in my heart as the co-host. It was really fun. It was a conversation with Tom Hawksley, who is our friend, our colleague here at Elam. He and his wife Mojdeh have served the Iranian church for many, many years, and they are well loved in the Iranian church. But Tom, like me, is also a history graduate, loves history, reads a lot about the history of the Iranian church. So we thought we'd get him in, give us the backstory of how we've gone from this tiny church to one of the fastest growing churches in the world today. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't love history and is thinking, oh goodness, don't worry, it's not going to be loads of dusty facts and figures. Tom really brings it to life with key people and key moments in the history. So I think it's going to be a really interesting episode to share.
Yeah, I've always loved listening to Tom, and he really does bring the history to life. And very importantly, the older I get, the more I've learned, to recognize and understand the season that we're in now. We have to look at what's happened in the past. And so I'm really excited that you picked this one because Tom is great. He loves the Iranian church. He's been involved in it for decades, really given his life to it, and has just great perspective that he can share. So Chrissy, I didn't actually know that was your first episode. Were you nervous back when you did that first one, or were you pretty confident? Yes,
I'd actually read all of Tom's book, one of the books he's authored, in preparation for that episode. So that was quite fun. But as I said, I love history, so that wasn't an arduous task for me. Mm-hmm. But actually, the reason I think I've picked it for now, aside from all of that, is that our listeners will be aware that, as you said, 2026 has been a difficult, challenging year for all of Iran and the region, but that includes the Iranian church. They've had a lot to deal with and respond to. And so I really just wanted to take this moment to help our listeners and to help me kind of step back a bit from the present turmoil and all of the very important questions that are in our minds at the moment. What's next for Iran? Where are we going? What does the next 6 months look like? And to just take a moment to locate ourselves in the bigger story that God has been writing and still is writing for the Iranian church. So in this episode, we'll look back over many seasons and periods that the Iranian church has been under pressure, has been in difficulty, and see how the Lord has brought them through that. And so I think that's just a really important thing to remind ourselves of in this season, that although there is much uncertainty, we trust that God continues to write his story and will sustain the Iranian church into whatever season is coming next.
Great. Yeah. Really glad people get to listen to this who have maybe not heard it. If you have heard it before, listen to it again, because like Chrissy said, taking a look back, listening to that part of the story makes us see what's happening right now in the bigger picture. We can pray with more intention. So let's roll the episode.
Well, Tom, thank you for being with us here today on Jesus Speaks Farsi. Hannah's here too. We're really looking forward to our conversation with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
We heard your personal testimony, Tom. Thank you for sharing that on a previous episode of Jesus Speaks Farsi. I do encourage our listeners to go and have a listen to that to get to know you a bit better. But today we're actually going to be talking to you in your capacity as a scholar of Iran's church. Can I call you that?
Oh gosh, yes, that's quite a heavy title. But I've read a bit, I've read a bit.
So you're a Bible teacher, you're a minister to Iran's church for the last, was it 25 years?
No, longer. I started off in 1984 in Karachi was when I first started focusing on reaching Iranians and getting involved in that. So 40 years.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
So, and in that time, you've researched, you're an author, you've looked at Iran's history. So, I'd love us to just dig into that a little bit today, if that's all right.
Go for it. But I'm not promising much, but go for it.
Can you give us a little, in a nutshell, or as nutshell as you can, when did the church first have a presence in what we now call Iran, and what's its journey been like?
I'll try, and just butt in if it gets boring. Please, there's nothing worse than somebody droning on. We don't want Alice, falling down that rabbit hole. So in a nutshell, really, you can say for certain that they're Iranian Christians by the 2nd century, or people living in the Iran area. Plenty of evidence for that. You have somebody which is the 4th century, at the Nicene Council. He's called, John from Persia. So the Iranians are there, definitely.
Wow.
And it's growing in the 5th century. I think by the middle of the 5th century, you've got roughly about 300, in the middle of 4th century, you've got 5 bishops and 100 clergy, and they're all connected with, the one big church. So they're all Orthodox. So the church has grown, most definitely, and they're a significant presence there. But very interestingly, just jumping right forward to where Christians are today, Christians today, as you alluded to, they're accused of belonging to the West, being even Zionist, and being a 5th column. Roll back the clock to the middle of the 4th century, exactly the same. This is what one of the Shahs says. He says, these Nazarenes, Christians, inhabit our country and share the sentiments of our enemy, Caesar. Because they had to, it wasn't that Rome was controlling things then, but as Christians, they were connected to Rome and Constantinople and the whole thing. And so they were persecuted. Massacres.
So after Rome became officially Christian, then anyone associated with Christianity was seen as an ally of Rome.
Yes, because especially when Rome became officially Christian, then it got much worse for them. Which was, when was that? Was that 316?
300s, wasn't it?
So around this time they said, well, okay, Rome's Christian, we are not Christian, we're Zoroastrian, and so these Christians they belong to the enemy. So exactly what's being thrown at the Christians today is exactly what was being thrown at them way back.
Wow.
In the middle of the 4th century. But the church survived, and then you have what we call the Great Nestorian Church. So you can Google about Nestorius. He basically didn't like the phrase calling Mary the Mother of God. He said, no, that's too much. We'll call her the variable. So huge row about Christology, which is what the church fathers got into. And Nestorius got sort of kicked out. But the Iranians loved him. The Eastern Church loved Nestorius.
Okay.
So so they became known as the Great Nestorian Church. And it grew and it grew. And we know that they were important in Iran because the Shah's doctor was Christian. His favourite wife was Christian, and there was a patriarch, a guy called Mar Abba. Fascinating story he has, but he was clearly close to the king because the Zoroastrians wanted to bump him off, assassinate him, kill him, send him to exile, and he just kept on coming back, and basically he had the Shah's
so the Shah was
protection.
officially a Zoroastrian at this point.
Yeah. The Zoroastrians were the official religion of, this very official religion. It was a Zoroastrian country, basically, and the Zoroastrians, they held all the influence and all of that. But the church is growing, and clearly the Zoroastrians are feeling threatened by that. So, so there's significant presence where then Islam comes, and this is where you have this caricature that the Arabs came in with a sword and they were horrible and brutal. But actually that's not the case at all. The Arabs came in, they needed the help of the Iranians, and they needed the help of the Christians because the Christians were a part of the hierarchy and they had influence as well. So the church, they're discriminated against, but the church continues to grow and to have influence and to function as normal. Through
when was this, sorry?
Early Islamic, sorry?
Just to clarify, when was this?
So Islam came to around the 7th century.
Right.
So we're talking 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. That period, the church continues to grow. This is actually the time when they're sending missionaries off to China and India.
Wow.
And so it's a functioning organization, discriminated against, but still being allowed to grow. And in the 13th century, the Mongols come. And there was a thought that maybe they would even become Christians. So there was this hope that the whole of Iran's going to become Christian because the Mongols were Christian. But
Right.
then 14th century, the big monster of Iranian church history appears on the scene. This is Tamerlane. And he was just brutal to everybody.
And he's a Mongol emperor as well.
He was a Mongol emperor. He was
Right.
brutal to absolutely everybody, not just the Christians. He completely massacred thousands and thousands and thousands of Iranians. There's no need to go into the detail, but it was absolutely gruesome. He was an extremely cruel man. Devastated all the churches completely, and the Nestorians, those who survived, they retreated to the northwest of Iran and became a much smaller minority there, and they're known as the Assyrians. They're still there today around a place called Armenian. So yes, in terms of that question that you asked, Iran has a strong Christian history with significant churches there right up to the 14th century. Then the Assyrians and the Armenians are there, so the Christian presence is there.
So sorry, the Assyrians are the descendants of the Nestorians. Who are these Armenians that have appeared?
Good point, Chrissy. The Armenians. So the Armenians, there's a guy called Shah Abbas, and he is the Shah in the 17th century, and there are wars constantly going on in Armenia because it's a buffer state. So he brings, I think it's about 100,000 Armenians. It might be more. And this was quite normal. Just brought them all back. And the city he brought them from in Armenia was called Julfa. He brings them back near Esfahan and says, your Julfa can be there. So the Armenians come to, Armenian Christians come to Esfahan, and Shah Abbas actually uses them as sort of go-betweens, and they have quite a favoured position. Then, as the genocide later on comes to the Armenians, many more come to Iran. So Iran had a very strong presence of Armenian Christians, and even today, even since the revolution, though many have gone to the West. The Armenians are a very definite Christian presence in Iran. In fact, one of the stories that we told of Ziba, who became a Christian because she was suicidal, some Christians visited her in the hospital in Tehran, prayed for her in the name of Jesus. They were Armenian Christians. So they are still there, and they have borne witness to Christ, the Armenians. So the Assyrians and the Armenians, just going back, so they are the presence 14th century up to the 18th century. Then the modern missionary movement comes in with Henry Martin, and then you have the Americans, mainly with the Presbyterians coming into the north of the country, and the Anglicans, the British, with Church Missionary Society, CMS, coming into the south of the country. And they do typically what those missionaries did. They built hospitals, they built orphanages, they built schools, and they were a very active presence. And the Presbyterian Church and the Anglican Church, wouldn't say it grew massively, but was a definite presence. So in actual fact, there has been a continual Christian witness in Iran since the 2nd century.
Wow. So when a typical Iranian on the street who's perhaps Muslim background thinks of Christians, what kind of associations do they have, do you think?
That's also a great question. I think it's complicated. I think, of course, some of it will be tainted by, the views of the government, which they'll think that they're fifth columnists, they'll think that they're Zionists, they'll think that they, But I think a lot of them will have respect, especially because of the witness of the Armenian Christians and the fact that they will have heard about all the hospitals and the schools that the missionaries built. And now, especially, they will associate Christianity with the West, but the West is associated with freedom. So if you think about what's just happened, remind me of the dear lady's name.
Masa Amini?
Yes, Masa Amini. If you think of all that happened, they look at the West and they say, well, people.
So you're talking about the protest movement that kicked off in Iran 2022.
Yeah.
Women, life, freedom.
So they see Christianity as being associated with the West, and the West having a lot more freedom than Iran. Yeah. So I would say generally positive, and also there's an irony here, though. Iran, says death to America and death to England, and all this sort of stuff. The Iranians generally, I think, have quite a positive view of the West, and especially of America. I think there's a lot of things in common between the Iranians and the Americans, that there's a what's the word? Symbiosis.
Symbiosis.
Have I got that right? Symbiosis. Yes.
It's a nice word. We'll use it.
It is.
Okay.
Brilliant. So I'd love to know, Tom, like in all of that process, just sort of thinking about perhaps a bit less of the wide angle lens for a second and some of the ways that we've seen the Lord moving in the region for all of this time. Like, do you have a favourite character or a favourite story from Iranian church history that you could briefly share with us? Something that shows the goodness of Jesus in the middle of all of the numbers.
I would just encourage your listeners, the Iran, history of Iran's church is a fascinating one. It's full of great characters. I mean, there's a guy called Tatian, who wasn't Iranian, but he's sort of very much considered the father of the church in the East. He was a fascinating character. Mara Abba, I've mentioned, but if you come to more modern times, I mean, massive Iranian characters like Bishop Dehqani, who was I could talk about the Kathapur brothers, Seth Yegnazar, who's the father of Sam Yegnazar, who started Elam Ministries with Brother Reza Roshan Zamir. But Seth, he's a character. Opened his house for 4 years for prayer meetings in Tehran. He believed God told him, open the door, let the people come in. 4 years every night, a prayer meeting.
Am I right? He was actually an Armenian, so of that group that you've told us a little bit about.
He was Armenian. He then became Brethren. He then left the Brethren, and he sort of really started this prayer fellowship. And then the Kathapur brothers, they were 2 Armenians who were studying here in England, became Christians here in English in the Pentecostal tradition, came to Iran, wanted to basically make sure all of Iran became sort of Pentecostal Christian. And they wanted to start a church. And Seth Yegnazar graciously supported their endeavors. They tragically died in a car accident in 1961. But they have a place in Iran's church history of the Kathapur brothers. Then you come to the revolution and the martyrs and Aristu Sayer and others.
Well, let's talk about the revolution, actually, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
You've taken us on a really nice little journey between 2nd century up to the 20th century, but then something really significant happens in 1979, isn't it? The revolution, as you just mentioned. Can you just, for our listeners, tell us what was that? Why was it significant?
Can we just acknowledge Chris's wonderful use of what we call as a British understatement? I think she said something significant.
Something a little bit important.
In 1979, and that something significant was the Iranian Revolution, the starting of the Islamic Republic, and the ending of 3,000 years of monarchy in Iran. 3,000 years of continually, the Iranians have had a king.
Wow.
And it was overthrown in 1979. So I think it is definitely significant. Where do you want to go with this? I mean, in terms of the Iranian Revolution, do you want to go with the church? Do you want to go with society?
I mean, we'd love to focus on the church in particular, but I don't think we can talk about that without knowing what were the hopes of the people when they brought in this revolution, and how did that actually play out for normal people and for the church?
The revolution was really a battle about identity. The Pahlavi kings, they stood for modernism, pushing things forward, science, keeping religion more at the side.
Right.
And definitely with the help of America. So Khomeini stood for Shia Islam and really what the vast majority of people in Iran believe. They were Shia Muslims. So Khomeini played it as a narrative battle. So Mohammad Reza Shah is a traitor to our identity. I stand for our true identity as Shia Islam. But Khomeini was a complete revolutionary, not just in terms of a political revolution. It was an intellectual revolution within Shiism. He came up with a doctrine called, my mind goes here, it's called Valier-e-Fikr. But I'm getting the pronunciation all wrong, so you can laugh at me, those of you who are Iranian, but I'm just getting it wrong. But the doctrine said that until Mehdi, who was an imam, who the Shias believe is going to return, till he comes back, an Ayatollah has to rule the whole country.
Yeah.
Now, before then, Shia Islam has said, no. We just have to sort of keep things. We mustn't rule. We mustn't get too involved in politics. We have to wait till Mahdi to come back.
That's
But
interesting.
Khomeini changed it completely. He said, no, we should actually rule. There should
It's meant to be a
Islam.
political leader, not just a sort of religious overseer kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He came up with this doctrine, and it was actually completely different.
Right.
So he comes back with this anyway. He comes back in February 1979, and the revolution takes off. Basically, he becomes a very authoritarian Islamic ruler, but he knew exactly what he was doing. Never underestimate Ayatollah Khomeini. He was a brilliant politician and leader. For the church, it should have spelt the end. Khomeini loathed, he knew about Christianity, but he loathed the Christianity that he saw coming from the missionaries. He saw all these churches being as a nest of spies. He was a traditional Muslim. That means nobody should commit apostasy. So the idea of Iranian Muslims becoming Christian with this new regime was just completely, off the radar. It should have ended.
Yeah. So would he have been okay with sort of the Assyrians and the Armenians keeping their sort of cultural roots in Christianity, because that was sort of their kind of background, but more like active Christianity, converting to Christianity, allowing the church to grow like in previous history was a real no.
You got it spot on, Hannah. You got it spot on. So, in actual fact, the Assyrians and the Armenians were extremely useful for him. Khomeini was very adept at sort of smokes and mirrors. So he was with the Assyrians and the army. He said, no, we're fine with the Christians. We tolerate the Christians. Everything is all right with the Christians. What he meant by that was, we'll make sure that they're okay, the Assyrians and the Armenians. But he didn't mean by that the Muslim converts. Absolutely not. No, that would have to be taken out completely. So he didn't attack the Armenians and the Assyrians, but boy, they attacked the Anglican Church right at the beginning of the revolution, really quite severely. Yeah. Yeah. So the church should have withered, and it's grown.
But we saw, as you mentioned, we saw some really harsh persecution in those early days and those early decades of the revolution. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those martyrs who lost their lives?
Yeah, well, the first martyr was Reverend Aristu Saya. So he was a Muslim convert, and he was ordained in the Anglican Church. So this is the church that grew out of the work of the Church Missionary Society. He was the priest in Shiraz. And in the early days of the revolution, there was, I wouldn't say a complete breakdown of law and order, but things were very, very hazy. And he, two men said that they wanted to see him. They were interested in Christianity. So he agreed to see them in his study. And my mother-in-law, she was a very close friend of Aristu Saya's wife, Iris, who was English, and they were going to have lunch together that day. So the priest is seeing these two seekers, and they're going to have lunch. So they're waiting for lunch. They're waiting for Aristu to come, but he doesn't come. So then Iris sends Kamran, who's just 17, where is he? So he goes to the study, and his young eyes see something which no young eyes should see, because Reverend Syed had his throat cut. So it was an absolutely horrific scene. If you can just imagine a 17-year-old opening the door and seeing that, it doesn't bear thinking about. No. He was the first martyr of this era. Right. Of the church. And of course that sent shockwaves through the whole thing. But I think it's important to say that Bishop Dehani, with people saying, well, we must close all the churches, they're going to come and kill us all, he refused. He said, no, the churches will remain open. Wow. Iris, the widow, she completely forgave the murderers. Wow. She completely forgave. I know that because Mojde, my wife, once went for a long walk with her. Yeah. And we know that she completely forgave. And till the end of her days, she continued to give out. And then my mother-in-law, who was also very much a part of it all, they then tried to take land from that church in Shiraz. Right. And they wanted to build a wall. So my mother-in-law wasn't very tall. I think you probably met her,
have
Chrissy.
met.
Yeah, she wasn't very tall. She wasn't a very tall lady. Yeah, probably about your height, Hannah.
Yay, short
Yay,
people.
but strong in spirit. So they wanted to come and take the land, and she came across the soldiers, the revolutionary soldiers, who wanted to take the land. So what are you doing? So we're building a wall. She says, sure, you can build a wall. You will build a wall over my dead body. She was absolutely serious. And they never built that wall.
Wow.
They never built that wall. And she remained a pillar. So though these two ladies had experienced such horrific trauma, you know, as being such a part of that first story, they both held strong. And I think that in a way shows, again, what went on with the other martyrs. So then after that, they arrested the bishop's secretary. Then they tried to kill Bishop Dehani. They went into his flat. 2 men went into his flat early in the morning, and they shot, I think, 6 bullets, really at quite close range. But 5 of the bullets went into a pillow, like a halo over his head, and 1 bullet went into his wife's hand. And she was British, and in typical British understatement, at the end of that, she said, "Oh, I think my hand's a bit hurt." Well, actually, her hand had a bullet in it, but after that, they thought it was best to leave the country. But very sadly, the next year they did murder Bahram, the son. So the Anglican Church suffered. You know, that's the Anglican Church suffered, and then later on, the Pentecostals, the Assemblies of God people, also suffered. And then in 1990, they hanged Reverend Sudman in Mashhad prison because he refused to recant. He refused. He had every opportunity to escape, but he refused. And then in 94 was a terrible year. It's shadowy, but the leader of the Presbyterian Church was killed. The leader of the Assemblies of God Church, Haikov Sepimir, was killed, and Mehdi Dibaj was killed. So, and then later a man called Ravan Baksh was hung. So somebody called Tobman. So rough. It's been rough.
Yeah, wow.
Really tough. So it makes me fascinated to hear that there's been obviously so much suffering, so much trauma that the church has been through, and yet the church in Iran continues to grow. People are continuing to turn to Christ, presumably aware that it's not all going to be easy, it's not all going to be rosy to follow Christ in that context. So what do you think is going on? Like, why are Iranians open at this time, and particularly since the revolution and since this new wave of persecution has been unleashed? What is going on in Iranians? I mean, obviously the spirit moves as it will, and we know that. So there's a level of, we won't ever be able to explain why the church is growing, why people are open. But is there anything we can sort of humanly discern about what is in their mindsets? Why are they open to this person of Jesus?
Well, I mean, I think it's the last words that you used were very beautiful. The person of Jesus. I mean, and I think especially because of the scriptures and the gospels and now the internet, the person of Jesus. So remember before, it was very difficult for Iranians to have explored the person of Jesus. Now they can. And the person of Jesus is incredibly attractive. And, you know, especially for ladies, and I think probably if we knew the statistics, I'm sure it would be more ladies who have been turning to Christ, because Jesus is so attractive to ladies. When you remember that in Islam, a woman legally has half the value of a man, when you realize that in Shia Islam you have temporary marriage, when you realize that the man can legally have 4 wives and inheritance and the whole of the religion, and therefore the God of that religion, is pushing the woman down. And then you come to Jesus, and you just have to read about Jesus with Mary, with Martha, and just the respect. You can imagine. I mean, this man is attractive as a man of honor. And so I think your last 3 words, the person of Jesus, I think a lot of it is there, that now Iranian people can read about the person of Jesus. But I think, as I said, because of the breakdown with Shiism, and because there's just been so much violence, and obviously before there was the war, so many dying for this Islamic war. Khomeini
Was that
said
the Iran-Iraq
war? We're going to get to Jerusalem via Baghdad and all of this, but
Oh, gosh.
in actual fact, they hardly won a metre of land. They didn't win any land at all. I mean, for 8 years, what did all those young people die for?
8
This
years,
Islamic
wow.
war, what has it given them? And you can go to the graves, you can see these young photos, and then the executions in the prisons. I mean, so many executions. In 88, I think they executed 5,000. And I think at some point in some people's hearts, they said, I just can't take all of this violence.
And even in recent years where there's been the protest movement and people have been arrested, again, really high arrest rate and executions. And it doesn't, it's sort of not just a thing that was in the past around the revolution, was it? Like people are still living the reality of a very violent government.
And I think there's been this breakdown. And I think then Jesus is incredibly attractive, and Christianity has a lot of attractions. And I think also we shouldn't underestimate the role of poetry in this. And the Iranians really have two scriptures, three. There's the Bible, of course, but there's the Quran, yes, but there's also Hafiz and Saadi and all the poets. They know their poetry
So these
very
are
well.
ancient Iranian poets.
Well,
are
they're
they?
medieval,
Medieval.
more medieval, and they are well known and well loved. And Iranians, they memorize poetry, and that creates a much more enigmatic, less severe black and white world. And Hafiz, one of their greatest poets, he has this line which says, pour wine on your prayer mat. Hafiz means he had memorized the Quran. So what's going on there? Why did he say pour wine on your prayer mat? He's saying experience God. Do all that it takes to experience God. So I think there is that mystical side within the Iranian culture, which also attracts them to Christianity. So,
So do those poets actually say things explicitly about Jesus?
Oh, yeah. Some of them do.
Wow, really?
Hafiz talks about it. Saadi talks about it. So if you go to Hafiz's tomb in Shiraz, they have an inscription up which actually has Messi, has Christ there. I can't remember them. I think one of them says, come to the door of Christ for healing and things, something like that. So yes.
Okay.
Beautiful.
So would you say there's this kind of dual thing going on where you've got the push factor of people being disillusioned with Islam because they're disillusioned with their government and all of, as you said, the violence and the oppression over the years. You've got that push factor, and then you've got the pull factor, as it were, of the person of Jesus and all this heritage that they can look back on, and these poets and the respect that they have for the Armenians and the Assyrians. Is that all playing together in some way?
I think it's wonderfully put. I couldn't push and pull. Absolutely. So before 79, I don't think there was a push factor because religion was just something there, but everyone was just getting on with their lives.
Right.
But then the revolution has come, and definitely now there's this push. But the pull factor is because, as I've said, because the scriptures have been available, and many people have given sacrificially for the scriptures to go to Iran. And I think the Iranian church is hugely thankful for that. And also now on the impact of the internet is phenomenal. I have noticed, because the internet has happened in my life, there's been a difference talking to Iranians before in terms of their worldview was much more predictable. But now, because of the internet, you talk to people and it's much more free moving because of the internet, because they have access to so many different ways of thinking. They can see stuff that's going on. So I think the internet is having a massive impact, not just in terms of being able to access the scriptures, but also because they see there's a very big and complicated world out there. Yeah.
Amazing. So I guess just as we sort of come into land, as it were, and one of the things that we talk about a lot, that we see a lot in the Iranian church, is not just people coming to Christ, because that's brave enough in itself, as we were just talking about, because of the reality of persecution, but then even really new believers sharing the good news of Christ with people, like on the street or with family and friends or anything like that. Like, to what extent does that sort of tie in? Is that kind of something that has always been there? Is that something that's characteristic of the church since the revolution, that's sort of part of the pull factor of Jesus, or
I think actually, if you go back to the early church, Tatian, he was an ascetic, but also it was a very monastic church, so very disciplined living, and they were traveling monks and they were traveling the gospel. That's why the church grew so much. But coming right forward now to the modern time, the 19th century, 20th century churches grew out of missionary activism. I mean, if you start reading about those 19th century missionaries, they were activists. I mean, they were very busy people, and I think they passed that on to their churches to be active and to be. And remember, all of them were there, with the great, missionary paradigm of we must bring the gospel to the ends of the world. So, which of course is there, but so they grew out of those churches. But I also think that Iran, if you look where Iran is geographically, it means you've got to be outward looking. So I've noticed that Afghans and Iranians are very different. And I think one reason is to do with geography. The Afghans can stay self-contained where they are, landlocked, whereas the Iranians are surrounded and they're a plateau and they've been continually invaded.
And they're on the Silk Road, aren't they?
They're on the Silk Road. Yeah. So they're I think, I mean, you shouldn't generalize, but I think the geography has just made them naturally more outward looking, more curious, more open to new and different ideas. And I think that, again, is they are very communicative people. So I think coming back to spreading the gospel, yes, they are great talkers, especially again the ladies. Especially the ladies, they understand that they have a role in the church, and they share the gospel with other ladies, and that's why I think ladies are playing a phenomenal role in the growth of the church.
Wow, beautiful.
We could go on talking, couldn't we?
We could. I was going to say, it's been a fascinating conversation, Tom, and I kind of wish we could carry on for a lot longer. But as we close, is there anything else you'd want to share with our listeners, or anything you'd want them to pray into what we've been discussing today?
I think yes. I think to pray for to keep the focus on the church. I think that is so important, because that is in the scripture. In Ephesians, you understand that everything is all about the church. And there are huge temptation to take the focus from the church to the politics, to what government there is, to foreign policy, to Israel. And let's pray that the Iranian church doesn't become nationalistic, but the Iranian church focuses on doing the three things that I think we Christians should do. We should share the gospel, we should build up other believers, and we should serve the poor. That's quite enough. I don't think we need to get worried about other things. So I think let's pray that the Iranian church is faithful in doing those three things.
Yeah, beautiful. We'll definitely pray for that.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much.